Yeah. That's fine. Yeah.
Just for the ticket, just gonna go fly and get stay at the game. Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, yeah. So where we are.
Oh, nice.
Just start playing. I'm playing. And this will be mostly. So the question I had was, the construction that comes in is, so, but if I wanted to create something like that, have the fields, rather do have new fields.
Because they're rebuilding some
Strings and stuff. Where did you do that?
So I guess my first question is, how are you feeling? Where's the data stored? What's the original source? How's it getting?
So it's my data.
So it goes straight from your app.
To Amazon.
Gotcha. So it's up here. And what picks it up off the queue? Is it like box dash?
From the queue that's just inserted.
Okay. Yeah, because what I was going to say was if you use box dash before how is it going to
Does it do also transformations?
Yeah, exactly. It's got 3 layers of input. I don't know much with block dash, what's like inputs, outputs. Yeah, but yeah. There's filters in the middle. So that's
doing with transformation.
Yeah, exactly. That's one way. The other thing would be like a map. I don't know if there's anything like that. Like you want to look at the value of the decision. Convert it to a pool.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do scripting inside Elasticsearch. I think data is a problem. But sometime earlier this year, they found a security vulnerability. They basically zipped over it. It's not safe. Yeah. That's the other thing. I mean, I've not done much of that either.
I mean, that is just when you just before them.
Yeah, I think that's really the other way. Yeah, I don't know. It's
like reading today. There's the mappings, but they are just literally over. I mean, if it's numeric, then you can't calculate some or mathematical calculation on strings.
Well, the other thing, you could have like, it depends on how complicated your goals need to be. I don't know if this is really the right use for this, but like the tokenizers, the analyzers.
And the analyzers.
You probably could use
I just heard that
whole because the tokenizers, they'll snap and take in a word and give you the standards. But it doesn't feel like the right thing. Yeah, it doesn't feel like the right thing. Yeah, I'd probably say, given that you might be in the other.
In a cluster.
It's probably something.
That feels right, actually. That 650.
Yeah, because then you kind of encapsulate business life. That's cool though. I mean, that is like use cases now.
You know, when it first came out, everyone used it, no one can use it.
Because you would get used to it, right? I mean, you can do whatever. You can transform query.
Yep.
Combine it with query.
There's also the option of clicking the same. The other thing, depending on how you're looking,
Auto factors like easier.
the point where you're actually using that tool, right? So you figure like the data's in there. Our way. I started to use that. Would you guys something like visualization? So that's the other one.
Acquire that. Well, basically,
We'll use this class in one place.
So-
We're gonna put it down.
based on those magic strings, but then they'll be all over the visualizations. And it's just
So rather than having it in all those different, because you can't, I don't know if you can read it like, some of that, you know, then reuse that.
I don't think so. It's just for visualization. So,
Great book.
and that could be also changing. So right now, so it's not yet talked about that.
Yeah.
Because I think
that's the first one.
Right, exactly, because the other one that I was thinking of today, but now we probably decided. Because we actually do the way of transforming one message into another message, right? It's a rule, and so it's automatically, you know, because it's going, and we have that object, some years. Well, I said, hey, how about we store
Not much soda.
how about we store our script in the C#, store in the database, then we can read it in our middle.
We're talking about that. I mean, it actually basically at this point, I mean, the conversation is, you know, I mean, so that was last night, email, I think 2 days ago, where it was like, oh, I mean, so we're discussing levels right now, but that was sort of the problem with like, so that was the, and I was like, I can't. I think that must be his wife's birthday or something like that, and, so I think we're working, because that's the challenge, it's like, we can have a table, but, I mean, I can't, I certainly can't do it myself, you know, so I will sponsor it, you know, but that's, I think what's going to work, that's good news, you know,
It's better than much.
yeah, nothing, yeah, trust me, I know, and, well, it's,
Right, just for
it's funny too, like some of the stuff that, you right, like just the stuff that, or whatever. DevOps days especially, there's certain things that are really picky about Spock. Like there's a very, like nobody can buy a phone ever. There's never like, oh, Spock for this long, and have to speak to you. You just don't, that's just period, you know. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that idea, that's just, that's global DevOps days, that's how it is. And, so as we get into that kind of thing, actually it was funny, it was not a code camp, what was the one? What was the event? Yeah, code camp. So there was like, there was a certain level, you do get to speak, but it was funny because Barry was kind of like, so let me know if your talk gets accepted, because that was sort of her thing. She's like, if it doesn't, we'll move on to the higher one. So she's like, do we need to do it or not, right? But
Did it rain a lot this summer?
oh, I was
Great.
yeah.
It wasn't being, I understand, that's private.
But then they'll come up with, oh, and then one of it, a lot of times they want like the attendee list. A lot of this is like formal conference stuff, like formal stages is a little different. Because people have certain expectations, you get to the next stage, that they're not gonna, so like what we did, when we added the platinum this year, we said one time. And it was so funny. So the big chef would pay for that, would pay to be the platinum. I'm like, well, what would it be? And it's this, they're like, well, look at this thing. I'm like, that's not enough. I'm like, it's be twice as much as that. I'm like, maybe twice as much. Yeah. It has to be more than like, your booth is right by registration. So one of the things that Mary wanted, she's like, well, could we send a message to all the attendees? And they're like, well, what kind of booth do you want? What we're okay with is we send an email out to everybody with a survey at the end. We're like, we're totally happy to have chef.
Yeah, that's okay. I forgot the 12.
Like, oh yeah, all we want to send is like, here's
It's in the refrigerator.
it wasn't sales. We were like, perfect, let's do that. That we won't give you the email addresses or anything like that. We were basically a spot to, a couple paragraphs in the email, the one email that we sent to all the attendees. And I think they get there, so their logo will be on the badge. So it's on lanyard, but it's on the actual badge, which I need to remind our badge people that we agreed to that. We've had certain conversations where like, what did we promise? Yeah. And there's certain things too that you just, like, part of it is the stuff you learn from an attendee, like just double-sided badges. They have to be, it's like the law of physics of like, post, right? No, the problem with that is if your name is only on one side. Yeah, so otherwise it's always, no matter what you do, it's always gonna flip so your name can show. No matter how many times you turn it around, right? Yeah.
I was at the Iowa Credit Camp.
Yeah, that was one of the things.
And then it's like
everyone's kind of
okay,
stepping up.
so I'm the guy where they're like, am I going to go see him or am I going to go home?
And then a lot of them will have like badges that have like neutrinos in them, so that like rolling LEDs that have their names. Not them on stage, but other conferences. I don't know.
For lots and I'm going to get a good session.
Trying to turn around one of those ridiculous sponsors that you got lately. And then there was one where it was, they wanted to like have a goodie bag they could get away to attendees. When you see each other, was it Monostatus, that's a medication, Monotus, yeah, they were like, well, we don't really want to do any of your packages, but here's various things we'd like to do, it could be like a la carte, like how much would it cost us to do this? Like one was being able to like get you to
The microphone,
maybe even about
Michael might be
because people don't technically a lot of swag. Maybe up to 12. Yeah, from a space before.
Not in front of the camera.
But no, it was like they wanted to have like a giveaway, like a takeaway, like everybody take this thing. And then that was what they were like, or you could just be silver sponsors where you have a swag table, you can just put them all out there and everybody will take it. So are these like multi-lights or all on? Of course, it's all right. Just thinking they could maybe make that a little easier to. Yeah. No, let's try. There we go. Is that good? Let me know as we go, especially when we get into the demo. When I'm on my terminal, it might be a little harder to do. Cool. You ready? Good. I'm gonna try. I'll do it.
Yeah, I'll go.
Hang out.
Well, guys, thanks for coming again this month. We have Matt here today from Chef to speak to us. He also is presenting at that conference later this year. That conference is coming up in August, so if you haven't bought a ticket, go buy it before the early registration tickets are over.
July 1st.
July 1st. So you have 2 weeks at most. something like that. On a different note, thanks for Platinum Consulting for giving us food, getting us a pizza. So make sure that say hello to Randy and those guys back there. And let's get started.
Cool, awesome. So yeah, I'm really excited about that conference. We've been, was interested in going last year, wasn't able to turn it around, and submitted a talk this year. Was excited that it got chosen. Attempted to give that talk at Kansas City DevOps meetup on Monday. It wasn't ready. That's okay. Now I know how to make it better. And one thing that, this title it says DevOps with Chef and Azure, and really we're going to talk a lot about infrastructure as code and how Chef can help with that. And the Azure part is kind of thrown in there because I'm going to do some demos that involve Azure, but there's nothing intrinsic about any of these pieces together that they only work in this way. So this is kind of focused on how you can use these particular tools together, but it's not like Chef only works with Azure or Chef only works with Windows or things like that, but trying to put it into the context, it's a .NET user group. Although in this weird alternate timeline we live in now, these things don't seem to matter. We kind of joked at ChefConf, we had Mark Razanovich and Jeffrey Stover up there talking about running lists in Azure, and the guys from Canonical talking about MAS, using MAS to deploy Windows. Like, it's a weird, but yet awesome world we live in right now. So a little bit of who I am. So my name is Matt Stratton. I'm a solution architect at Chef Software, but I'm also a member of the Chef community. I've been using Chef for years. So I really want you to think about that I'm here talking about Chef, the project, Chef, the technology, not here to sell you Chef. If you'd like to buy Chef, my card's in the back, or if you want to talk to me about things in general, I put them somewhere. They might be under the
they're back over
Okay,
there.
so I've got my cards back there. Again, always remember that I'm here to be able to help professionally with Chef stuff, but I'm also just part of the Chef community and really want people to have a delightful experience. I host a podcast called Arrested DevOps, and there's stickers for Arrested DevOps back there. Unfortunately, I don't have any Chef stickers with me because I gave all my Chef stickers away at this conference I was just at. We do have, I'll find the URL because it's brand new, but it's something like delightmylaptop.chef.io or something like that. We now have a website where you can basically request free Chef stickers. So I just found out about it yesterday. So before the end of the night, I'll find it. I'll write it up there. One of the organizers of DevOps Day Chicago, so I'm going to take 1 second to plug on that. So that is August 25th and 26th. I have the URL up here, devopsdays.org. So and that will be at the Bleacher Center downtown. Calls for papers or calls for proposals, depending on what you think it means, are open until the end of the month. We might still have some early bird tickets available. There were 15 left as of the other day. This is the second year we're doing it, and it's a really cool conference. So did anybody go last year? Cool, so Sean go this year. So you won't know the things we messed up. And then just as a background for me, I spent most of my career in system operations and tech ops, primarily on a Microsoft platform. I've run tech ops for infrastructure companies. I used to be an Azure VTSP, which if you know Microsoft, that's the thing they do when they don't have enough people. So they farm out to partners. So it's like being an unpaid employee at Microsoft. But I was an Azure expert for them. I've been an infrastructure consultant, yada, yada, yada. So this is a quote from Adam Jacobs, who's the creator of Chef, that he gave in philosophy in 2010. And actually, I need to update this stat because I've got better quotes from him that he talked about this year, but it's still true. And the point is, DevOps is a cultural and professional movement. So that's it, period, right? There's no technology. You can't patent DevOps, despite the fact that some people are trying to do that. There's this DevOps Institute thing, which I think is kind of silly and ridiculous, and you can be DevOps certified and all this crazy junk. I am being recorded, aren't I? No, it's okay. I've not been shy on Twitter about what I feel about this stuff. But it's a way of doing work, and it's built from the practitioners. We build DevOps ourselves as people doing the work. Because, I mean, how awesome was it to have that handwriting point? So there's a lot of different ways that people kind of use to explain what this cultural movement is about. If you've read the Phoenix Project, Eugene Kim talks about the 3 ways. I still always go back to this thing called camps. And this was kind of first proposed a few years ago by a couple gentlemen named Damon Edwards and John Willis. John Willis, who's now at Docker. And it's an acronym that stands for Culture, Automation, Measurement, and Sharing. And they are in this order only because then they spell a word. It's not like one comes before the other. They're all equally important. A lot of times, and in my more, I have a talk I do called the 5 love languages of DevOps, and that one I refer to columns, and the L stands for lean. So a lot of the principles of lean manufacturing and lean startup are part of DevOps, but we're not really going to talk about that as much today. But the thing is, these things are all important in how we do this work. So the culture is the how. How do we interact with each other? And this is the thing that a lot of people like to kind of turn their nose up at or go, oh, that sounds like a bunch of unicorn, hippy-dippy, Netflix, Etsy, bullcrap. But the culture is really what your work experience is like. You know, and we use a lot of words like empathy, and that turns people off. And all that empathy means is like, don't be a jerk, right? Realize that we're all trying to do the same work. We're all here to sell shoes, right? Coders' jobs, sorry to say, is not to write code. The sysadmin's job is not to keep the website up. Our job is to enable the business that we all share to ship product or do whatever it is that we need to do. And that's really where the culture comes in. The automation is because a lot of this all comes from being able to work at velocity. So if we think about, in a lot of ways, I have this thought that DevOps is really the logical extension of Agile, right? So with Agile, we said we wanted to be able to move more quickly. We wanted to be able to shorten feedback loops, move at velocity. And what happened is we did a really good job of involving product people in that and development and most of the time testers. And we kind of forgot about all of the infrastructure that our stuff runs on. So DevOps is kind of the extension of that. And Patrick Dubois, who was one of the founders of the original DevOps days, said the reason that we call it DevOps is because Agile System Administration was too long of a name for a conference. So it's, what I want you to think about DevOps is a portmanteau, which means it's combining two words together. It's combining development and operations. It doesn't mean operations for devs. It doesn't mean dev do the op. And then I'm sure you may or not heard a lot of the jokes, which is, well, it's really dev, sec, QA, test, product is ops or whatever. That's now becoming a ridiculous word. So we're just going to call it what it is. It's DevOps. But it means that ultimately we're all thinking about the thing. A fellow named John Vincent, goes by Lose This on Twitter, had a quote that it was kind of, I think it was a requirement in all DevOps Days talks last year to make sure you included his quote. And not knowing my audience here, I'll clean the language up a little bit. But he said DevOps means giving a crap about your job and never saying that's not my job, right? Doesn't mean that everybody does everything, but it means that, hey, if I can help someone else out, then, you know, we'll do what we need to do. And I need to understand, and a lot of times we talk about things that it means, you know, there's people be like, oh, it means that, you know, devs need to carry a pager, and it means that ops need to like be able to code, and that doesn't necessarily mean that. Anyways, so think about that our idea is that we want to improve velocity. We want to be able to shorten that feedback loop between an idea and getting feedback, right? And we get that. I think developers get that more than ops people because we've been through Agile, we understand that. Well, if we want to be able to do that, we have to have automation because blockers, manual steps are blockers, right? Anything that requires human interaction is going to be slow and potentially error prone and certainly not repeatable. Hence the need for automation. Measurement. Measurement is just how do we know we move the needle if we aren't measuring the needle, right? We're talking about continuous improvement. That's a big part of lean, right? It's always getting better incrementally. Measuring is really important. We need to measure what does our cycle time look like? You know, how quickly are we deploying? What's our batch size look like? All that stuff. So measurement's really important. But what's super important about that is sharing that. And that's the S. The S is for sharing. And so sharing means two things. One is sharing all the data from the measurement, right? So there should be no secret dashboards. Anybody in the organization should be able to see whatever they want because who knows how that's influential. And then likewise, again, to drop a reference from this book, The Phoenix Project, you want no Brents. You don't want to have one person. You don't want to have single point of failure of humans. And those happen for two reasons. Sometimes, I'm sure we've all worked with someone who makes themselves a single point of failure because that's how they're going to guarantee their career, right? If I'm the only one that knows how to do that, they can't fire me because this company will burn to the ground if they don't have, you know, if Jimmy the sysadmin goes away because he's the only one who knows how to do DB2 anymore, right? So we're sharing information, and that goes back to the culture as well, because when we live in a culture of fear, we don't want to share, because you know what? Humans make mistakes, sorry. And if we sit there and say, so there's two ways, there's kind of the old way, the more, and I don't say old because a lot of people do it this way. You know, it's the beatings will, you know, continue till morale improves, which is the, okay, if you make a mistake, I'm going to punish you for making a mistake. So if I do that, so let's think, this is basic psychology. I know nothing about psychology, but this to me seems just kind of like common sense. If I punish someone for people for making mistakes, do you think that's going to make them make less mistakes, fewer mistakes? Not really. What's it going to do? What do you think it's going to do? What's that? They're going to lie. You're good at hiding their mistakes. And then, so as soon as that happens, you have zero confidence in your production at that point. People will work to the metric you give them. So we assume that, and if you, a really good book is Sidney Decker's on Field Guide to Human Error. And it's not necessarily IT specific, but it talks a lot about this. And you make the assumption that humans make mistakes. So we build our systems to be resilient as much as possible, you know, around human mistake. And then when we have an issue, we want to go back and we want to say, like, not that, hey, you know, Jimmy messed up, let's fire Jimmy. It's how can we make this so that if Jimmy or anybody does that again, because Jimmy didn't do it maliciously. Now, if somebody does something maliciously, that's a different story. But think about this. Most of the times when people have broken something in your environment, did they do it maliciously? Did they do it because they wanted to put the company out of business? Well, sometimes, but probably not most of the time. That's the difference where you don't say, oh, that's okay. That's where you say, security, escort this person out of the building because they tried to burn the company down. So that's a whole big conversation. And we had an episode of Rest of DevOps where we talked about blameless culture. And Etsy's really a pioneer in this. They have what they call the 3-arm sweater award, which they give out monthly to the person who screwed up the website the worst. And it's an award that's celebrated because it's like, hey, that's great. You know, they also, within their organization, if you in your email click on a phishing link, you are rewarded if you tell, and you basically click on a phishing link and then report to security whoever and say, oh wow, I just got phished. They give you a gift card and say, thank you for telling us because now we can do something about it because it's going to happen. So that's the sharing part. So hey, all the culture automation. That's cool. So that's enough like DevOps-y stuff. Let's kind of talk a little bit about the dev and the ops specifically, and especially around complexity. So over time, how many people have been working in this industry more than 10 years? Okay. So that's kind of an arbitrary number, although when I think about it, I'm like, actually this number, it's actually probably been a little longer than 10 years. But I'd say about 10 to 15 years ago, it was possible for an admin or a developer to keep everything about their systems in their head and understand all the pieces and parts as a complexity went. I mean, again, you work for, you know, Bank One or something like that, you're not gonna know every single thing, but within your kind of bailiwick of product, you could understand all the interactions. This isn't true anymore. Our systems have become substantially more complex. So we look at the way that we so the way that we manage this complexity in the two different worlds, operations and development. And as we work through our maturity model, as we went, kind of the first level of maturity would be for development, like the way that you do things when you first start. Did you just write code? You're like, someone asks me to do a thing, and I write code, and I ship it, and there's my code, right? Operations, what do? We RDP into servers, and we make with the clicky, or we SSH into servers, and we make with the back, with the, MD fans or whatever. So, and then this is dev and ops are still working independently, right? So we're getting a little better now. Maybe as an ops person, I've got a server.txt file where I keep notes of the things that I did when I already feed into the server that say, okay, in the wizard, click here, click next, type in an IP address, click next. And developers are now getting a little more, so they're testing their code on some dev server that they spun up for them. And they're like, okay, at least I got beyond it works on my laptop, it works on some other special Snowflake artisanally crafted server. But it's better. It's not great, but it's better. Now we're getting a little better, some incremental improvements. Let's move those notes out of server.txt. Let's put them in a wiki, And developers are now you're maybe using version control. You're like, okay, I'm going to commit to version, put commits in there. So again, and maybe I should ask this question at the beginning. I'm making a very big assumption here, given the name of the user group, but How many people here, their primary responsibility would be on more of the development side? Anybody, any fellow ops type brethren here? Okay. All right. So I always, and again, my career is mostly in ops, so I try to not be super snarky towards devs, but it happens. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of things that go both ways. But so we're getting better. So now we're gonna go to the next level, and we're gonna say, okay, so I'm gonna write some custom scripts. Maybe I'm gonna write a PowerShell script or a Bash script to do those things that I did. Devs are gonna ask a QA team to test their code now. So things are getting incrementally better, but we're still very much working in isolation. And then we say, okay, now we're gonna do, then, you know, ops goes, okay, this is our solution, golden images. We're gonna build a server the way it's supposed to look like. We're gonna make an AMI if we're an Amazon, and we're gonna make a VHD or whatever. That's the server, and they're all gonna look like that, because it's the gold image, it's gold standard, you know, and then, you know, and you're like, okay, well, the test failed, so now we start over. So that's not really super mature either, but it's funny. So gold images are not the answer, and there's a few reasons for that. One is gold is heavy, and the way that analogy means is just that they're big, right? So an image, an AMI, or a, you know, a VHD or VMDK or whatever is a large file. They're hard to move around. You know, how do I get that? If I want you all to have a local copy of your machines, I'm going to copy around a 40 gig file for that image. They're very hard to mold. So once I've created it, changing it is tough. I don't know how much of this is actually true about gold, because I thought gold was actually kind of malleable, but bear with me here on this. I took the slide from someone else, but it makes sense. But it's true about golden images, right? Things change, and I always say that an image is like a car, right? You drive it off the car and it loses 30% of its value, or like drive it off a lot, loses 30% of its value or whatever. Golden image loses 30% of its value about 30 seconds after you build it, because things change, complexity. And then it's easy to lose that configuration detail. How do I know? All I know is that I stamped this image at this time, but I have no way of understanding what's in that image unless maybe I created a whole bunch of notes. It's like, well, it has IIS on it, and it's got this version of the .NET framework, and it's got this installed in this directory, blah, 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 blah. But losing that configuration detail is really challenging in golden image. So the problem with this, with what we moved on to, you know, devs got better by doing the test, starting over, going through a loop. You know, we got better and we said, okay, we're going to do golden images, so at least we've got some standards. But we have, from the outside, we have no solid feedback loop for our devs. So there's no way of understanding that the infrastructure we're building is even right. And you have little or no coordination with the ops team. So, you know, if this was mostly an ops group, I would ask the question. Actually, I'm going to ask it this way. I'm going to ask the same question. I'm going to, instead of saying how many times have you heard, I'm going to say how many times have you said, well, it worked on my machine. It worked in dev, you know, and that's because of poor coordination, right? Because we've got special snowflakes, handcrafted stuff that's not accurate. So very quick, I guess this is my little plug. What is Chef? He's our chef. This is actually an out-of-date picture. There's a lot more people now. What's that? Those are totes. Totes. Oh, you know what's funny? We like gave them away at when you start. Oh, that's not lost. I haven't looked at this picture in a while. There's more people there than that. Well, this might be our sale. I don't know what. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I just sold this real quick. But so Chef itself, this is Chef the company. These are just Chef people. But Chef itself is an open source framework for managing complexity. It's a declarative language for describing and configuring infrastructure. And it's an awesome community of professionals. That awesome community are not the people who get their paycheck from Chef Software Inc. So there's about 220 some people who, you know, get a W-2 every year from Chef Software Incorporated. There's over 60,000 people who are part of the Chef community. And those people are way more important. Adam Jacob likes to say that, you know, Chef Software, the company, would, or Chef the project would exist without Chef Software the company, but Chef the company would not exist without Chef the project. So we're very much dependent. I don't even say dependent. We love it. It's not like, oh, it's terrible. It's an integral part of Chef working. It's that open source community. And then a fast-growing company based in Seattle. So, and just to put things in perspective, I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary of Chef a couple weeks ago. When I started, there was about 160 people working there. There's 220 now. I think 2 years ago, there were 80 people, and so we'll probably be at 300 by the end of the year. So growing very, very fast. I think round D of funding is closing, so very fast growing company. But of those 220 people, only about 80 of them actually work in Seattle. So that's the end of Chef company. So how does Chef work? There's your code. So Chef ensures your desired state by continually testing and repairing individual resources in the system. So if you've looked at configuration management things before, you may, or been in this space, you may be familiar with things like idempotent and convergent, and all this stuff, and that's fine. I like to just say test and repair because it explains it a little bit better. What idempotent means is that it's a mathematical term that we kind of are using incorrectly in config management, but it means performing the same operation over and over again gets the same result, like multiplying by 1. But what happens with Chef is you continually test and repair individual resources in your system, and you're testing to make sure they're in the state you want them to be. So, for example, like I want to make sure that IIS is installed. So I'm going to test, is IIS installed? If yes, cool, do nothing. If not, repair the state of the machine by installing IIS and make it the way it needs to be. You compose these policies using a series of simple declarations, which we call recipes, and I'll show you how those work. The Chef client, which you can think of as the agent, whatever, it's the node, the thing that you're managing. It fetches these policies from a central server and applies them to the local machine, and then goes back. It records the state of the machine, any changes it had to make, sends them back to the database where it's indexed for search, reporting, and audit. The search is really a powerful piece of that, and I'm not going to get into the great detail about that, but I mention it because smart people who try to learn Chef on their own, which is awesome, search is a thing that people don't realize is a feature, and where that's really powerful is it's letting you, it's all building towards this idea of having your systems be independent actors. So think about in this idea is if I've got a bunch of web servers, right? And then there's a database server. So what I can do is I can lay down, and they're going to have a connection string, right? That tells me here's my database server for this particular environment or whatever. So one of the ways to do it that's still better than hard coding it on the machine is I could say, oh, if you're a web server in environment, QA, then your database connection string is, DBQA1, whatever. But what's even more awesome is I can say the value of your database server is the host name of whatever the machine is that has the role of database server in your environment. So if I whack this machine and I bring up a new one, I don't have to touch these, they do self-discovery. It's not it's not service discovery, but it's searching for information about other machines. So you're building your stuff independently. Good example too, we get a lot is like with hot proxy. So if I'm saying, hey, I've got, instead of having the HA proxy machine sitting there with the list of all the machines, and saying query and find all the machines that have converged that said they're a properly converged web server and add them to your pool. So all I need to do when I want to add a new web server is just fire one up, let it get configured, and it will actually be automatically added. So I'm just bringing up search because nobody ever knows about it. Until I teach them fundamentals and they're like, oh, awesome. So infrastructure is code in a nutshell. Define policy that describes your infrastructure. Infrastructure should look like this. An autonomous agent implements your policy. The policy enforcement is continuous and safe. So we're going to talk about things like, we think about the ideas of continuous delivery and of our infrastructure code and versioning of our code and testing, all sorts of things that developers already know about, but we treat our infrastructure that way. And this lets you automate all of the infrastructure at scale. So to put this in perspective, in this case, Facebook server is managed by Chef because there's no way that you could do any of that by hand. And that's all environment. I'm like, really? Yahoo. There's huge scale, but also I've told people before, I have friends and colleagues they're like servers. Why do I need Chef? How does Chef help me? I don't build a lot of servers, and one of them is this idea of executable documentation. Also describes specifically. You can look at I can look at my Chef code and say I know what my systems look like versus going and looking at my wiki of the last time I built it. So even if it's a small thing, I use Chef to configure my MacBook because it's just that way. I say this is the state that I know I want things to be in. you know, and in this case, I mean, I have two computers. I have an iMac and I have my MacBook, and I'm like, I want to make sure that my dot files are all the same, and I've got the same version of Ruby and all the things, and it configures them. So it doesn't have to be Facebook world for Chef to make sense. It kind of works all over the place. And it builds any, like I said, simple internal applications, complex workstations, Hadoop clusters, talk about IaaS infrastructure. There's this I can't be specific about, but there's quite a few IaaS providers of scale that you wouldn't believe that are Chef underneath the scenes. So a lot of you are probably writing on top of Chef stuff besides when you go on Facebook and parts of Twitter. Storage systems as well. So it's not just about servers. So you can configure network devices, storage devices. Target just open sourced their F5 cookbook for manipulating F5 through Chef, which is pretty rad. So you can build any of the things. And then and this management is simple. So it's automatically reconfigure anything. The example of that is like, hey, so let's think about this. Let's say I've got like 2,000 servers out there, and they're all running RDP on 3389 as default. InfoSec comes along and says, oh, no, port masking should be a thing, security through obscurity, so change the RDP port to 4298. Well, that would really kind of suck to like go on all those machines. Or you could even write a partial that might loop through everything and do them all. But what if you forget one? How do you know it works? It's just a parameter in my Chef code. I just say, hey, change the port to this. Boom, the Chef client run on all those machines. It's all fixed. Linux, Windows, Unixes, BSDs, even AIX. I already talked about all this stuff. And cloud migrations become trivial. This is really cool, really important when you think about the idea of being cloud agnostic. So as much as I'm going to talk about Azure and Azure is sweet and everything, so all these big cloud things like AWS or Azure or Google, they're walled gardens, right? Like unless you're using pure IaaS, they give you all these awesome things like RDS or SQL as a service or whatever their SQL Azure thing and all this stuff. But you can't move that, right? Now you're tied in. But if you want to be able to be cloud agnostic, and a good example of this is United. So United runs production in both Azure and AWS, active between both, because for them it's super important to be cloud agnostic. If your infrastructure is defined as code, you don't care, right? I don't think I have it in this deck, but Custom Ink, who prints, among other things, awesome Chef shirts, they had a scenario where they were under a DDoS attack and they had to move from their colo to AWS very quickly, and their infrastructure was all defined in Chef code. So they went, oh, no big deal. Basically infrastructure as code means that you can replicate your business as long as you have access to your code repository, a data backup, and compute resources. So I also have stories of companies that couldn't do this and they're out of business. Anybody heard of a company called CodeSpaces? Do you remember those guys a couple years ago? They were like a SaaS solution for hosting SVN and Git, like imagine GitHub, but like for everything. So they got DDoSed or they got attacked in Amazon, couldn't keep up with it. Their infrastructure was all hand-built. They completely went out of business in 12 hours because it was going to take them more effort to rebuild their business than what it cost to do that. So let that be a lesson to people somehow, I don't know. So there's a couple things too when you think about this. So when we talk about how Chef works, so I'd say DevOps is a two-way street. We're finding DevOps problem now, right? So usually I might be giving this talk to ops people and say we think things like to an ops person, DevOps means developers should care about uptime and scaling and deployment and put them on call and make them carry a pager. But really, like, how do we actually work together? And this in the DevOps way, it's the developer says, hey, the hotfix is ready, the test pass. Ops person says, consider it already pushed, it's done. Non-DevOps is, this is probably, I'm sure we've all worked here. Says tomorrow we have our biannual and annual internal products pushed to prod, expect bugs at the minimum. And people are like, and then some ops person goes, yeah, I'll be off on that day. And this is the thing that gets when you don't have the right tools in place. If we think about Agile, like one of the things that we learn in Agile is we like small batch sizes, right? We want to release more often. Business wants to, our business, I should stop saying that that's a bad habit that everybody has, including me. We want to release more often because we want to make smaller incremental changes. But if you're an ops person where a release means I'm spending the weekend in the data center putting out fires, and then you come to me and say you want to do this more often, well, you can go to hell. So what we do is we look and we say, so how can we make this, and this is just the ideas behind one of the principles in continuous delivery is production releases should be boring, we should be like, no big deal, whatever. And again, it also goes back to the concept of when something's painful, do it more frequently. So we want to think about that. How can we work together? We can work by making it something that happens more frequently. And again, ops has a lot to learn from developers as well, especially when we talk about infrastructure as code. So if we talk about kind of the old software development workflow, you know, maybe the way that we did things in the early 2000s and before, you'd write some code, maybe do some ad hoc verification, push that code to pre-prod, do some ad hoc verification there, you know, fire it up in the web browser, click around, go, yeah, it looks pretty cool, whatever. Go to production and production fails, right? Because it's all manual. They give this talk and people are like, not my shop. I'm like, well, okay. As an industry, we got this. Write some code, run the unit tests, go to pre-production, run tests, go to production. You know, again, test-driven development is what this is really talking about. Automated testing. So we talk here, this is, and this is funny because I say this is the old Chef Cookbook workflow. This would have been the workflow up until about 1.5 years ago. So that's how, quote, old it is. But what we would do is you would write some cookbook code to configure a system. You'd apply it to a machine. You'd do some ad hoc verification, you know, RDP, Intuit, or SSH, and go, yep, Apache sure is running. Yep, it's listening on this port. Okay, looks cool and everything. Go to pre-prod, you know, same kind of thing. You get the same kind of story. Because it's code, it's the same stuff. So this is the new Chef Cookbook workflow. So what you do is you write some cookbook code. You check for code correctness. You might think about this as linting, you know. You're going to run unit tests because we can run unit tests against Chef code now. You're going to go to pre-production. You're going to run integration tests, which are automated tests. They're using maybe a testing framework like Pester or Server Spec or something like that. And then you go to production and you feel it's safe. That's a big thing. And if you are going to that conference, it is a huge topic of my talk. My talk is called Making Infrastructure S'mores with Chef. And it talks about how we can layer this together and we can have ops people writing some of the Chef code and devs writing some of the Chef code. But you can still make sure that people aren't writing things that break stuff. So, demo time. So I'm going to show here is, so there's a couple things, and I am going to do this as Bill O'Reilly would say, F it, we'll do it live, because I'm not sure if some of these tests are going to pass. So I have a cookbook. Actually, first I'll show you the code that we're working in.
Can you make the font a little bit bigger?
I'll make the font bigger on the terminal, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll make the font bigger here for sure. Oh, Microsoft, are you kidding me? So this is Visual Studio Code. Every other application to make the font bigger is like, you know, Controller Command Plus. And then it's like, no, we need to make it, oh no, that's right, because it's Shift. No, okay, I take it back. Instead of saying Command Plus, they're like, do Shift Command Plus, or Shift Command equals, which is Command Plus, right? All right, so this is a very simple recipe that's going to do a couple things for us. And this is not the one I'm talking about. Sorry, that's something else I'm working on. This one. This is actually a Chef cookbook I'm working on with a friend of mine to give you a nice resource. Where the heck? Oh, I'm in Atom. I'm in the wrong editor. Sorry. Now that explains everything. There we go. And let's make. Oh, that's even more awesome. Visual Studio Code, it doesn't even, Zoom. Oh my God. Okay. So they did do it different than everybody else in the world. Which is especially funny because Visual Studio Code is built on Atom. But anyway, all right, so this is a pretty simple recipe for my awesome app. And what it's going to do is I've got a list of Windows features that I want to install. And this is the most complicated Ruby you ever end up having to write in Chef. This is just me splitting out a white space so that I don't have to do each of these one at a time. I'm going through and I'm using the Windows feature resource for each of them, and it's saying spin through them and basically see, is, you know, framework 4 installed? If so, move on. If not, install it. Is 4.5 installed? You know, et cetera, et cetera. then it's going to make a user. Now you'll notice this, it doesn't say the name of the user. So this is using what we call an attribute. So an attributes can be set. There's default ones we set for the cookbook, which are, if I don't set them somewhere else, I'll set a default so that it doesn't break. But I can set them on specific machines. I can set them especially specifically, and I'll show you this, based upon their environment, because I might have a different username and password, or passwords actually should never start in attributes. So this is a do as I say, not as I do exercise. There's ways to invert this, but I'm not doing it. But I may have certain things that are different, so it's using this, and I have a default that's set for that. So these are all my defaults. I'm saying my default site name is my awesome app, is web root, blah, blah, blah. But like, think about it this way. In dev, maybe you're installing it on C, but in production, maybe it's D. So this is letting us separate the code from the data. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say, I want to make sure I have a user, because this is the user that the app is going to run as. I'm going to have a directory, because I'm going to say create a directory for my app, and then recursive true, just make sure that it builds the whole way. I'm going to get rid of the default website because I hate it. I'm going to create an IIS site called My Awesome App with the HTTP protocol, port 80, all this stuff. But the thing is, it looks like you're saying, okay, well you're creating these things. I actually didn't make those work. What I'm doing is I'm just making sure they're there, right? So I'm saying this is a desired state for this server, is to have a user with this setup, is to have these particular IIS things working, and blah, 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 and then make sure that IIS is enabled to start on startup and make sure it's running. Now, the other thing that I've done is we talked a little bit about testing, and I'm going to work a little backwards in this, but I just want to show you. So I'm using Pester, and how many people have heard of Pester before, familiar? Pester is the testing framework for PowerShell. And the reason that it's kind of useful, and in this case, I could use server spec almost. Well, actually, no, it's great, because I am using PowerShell commandlets to ensure things. So this looks like if you'd use Cucumber or RSpec or any kind of spec stuff, it's spec style language that says, I expect this. So I'm saying I expect that the web server role is installed. But I get to write this in PowerShell instead of writing it in server spec language. So depending on what you like, right? If you're a Rubyist, you're like, okay, well maybe, and I know RSpec really well, then server spec is rad. But I could use Pester as well. I can use, and there's other ones as well that you can use. So now, the thing that I was going to show you before I go back to show you where those tests happen, I've got a bunch of different, and this is, we wanted this bigger still. Okay. So the first thing I can do is we have it, remember I said we're going to test for code correctness. So there's a tool called Food Critic that is basically a linter that runs a whole set of rules that the chef community has mostly come to agreement upon about good chef style. But it also is going to check for like certain things that might make things not work at all. I haven't run Food Critic on this particular cookbook in a while, so we'll see what happens. I'm pretty sure it passes, so that's good. But now the other thing is what we didn't talk about, and I'm just going to allude to it really quick. Chef code evaluates as pure Ruby. You don't have to be a Rubyist to write chef code, but it's really an extension of Ruby. Why that's powerful is you can use Ruby stuff in your recipe, like you saw me do with my iterating through the white space array, but also tools that have never heard of chef before in their life, but they know how to do stuff with Ruby, like code coverage tools, or etc., will work. And one of those tools is something called Rubocop, which is basically just a Ruby style checker. This is the one that I'm pretty sure is going to flag all over the place. Yeah, so this came back and okay, 8 offenses, and it's telling me stuff like use two, single quoted strings, blah, blah, blah. The good news is you can override these if you don't like them, but I have them. I don't think my spec tests are going to pass because I haven't written any. But now the final one I want to show you is this thing called Kitchen. So Test Kitchen, what this lets me do is actually, so you'll see I have a machine defined down here. It's towards the bottom of the screen. I'll hit enter a few times so you can see it better. No, oh yeah, okay. So you can see it says the instance is Windows 2012 R2, drivers, Vagrant, blah, blah, blah. And it says that the action is converged. So the reason I did that, I got to this stage, is because it takes a little time. But what Kitchen will do is it basically spins up a disposable virtual machine, and in this case, I'm using VirtualBox on my local machine. I could do this with EC2, I could do this with VMware, wherever it might be. It's gonna apply my chef code to it. So it's gonna create a machine that's configured the way that my chef code would, and then it's gonna run those pester tests. So what I can do here is if I say kitchen verify, which all it's gonna do there is it's gonna go ahead and spin through and it's gonna actually run those tests. We'll see that they passed. So this lets me test my chef code pretty much 100% before it even leaves my laptop. So I have great confidence in what it's going to do. So you can see it's installs PS, it uses PSGet to pull it down and blah, blah, blah. And now it's running through the tests down there at the bottom. And then we can see there, it said it did it. It should have the web server role, it should have the web publishing role, blah, 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 and it just says pass 4, failed 0. So I know it's cool. So I'm like, I can go ahead and commit this and push it up. So point is, it's code, right? We do this just like we do with our app code. Now, let's talk about how things can work in the world. So this machine, I'll show you a little bit later. This is one I pre-built because building a new VM in Azure Windows VM takes like 5 to 10 minutes for it to all come up. So I'm going to walk through how I provision one, and then I'll show you what it looks like on this one. So this is all stuff, and by the way, everything we're doing here, you can do, there's PowerShell commandlets that lets you do this. You do most of it with the Azure, the XPlat tools at the command line, but you can do this in the portal. You can do it in the new portal as well. It looks a little less delightful because the way they do Azure extensions in the new portal, it's like you spin up a new VM, then you apply the extensions. I don't know. How many people have used Azure a bunch in here? Okay, so you know how like when you create a new VM, there's Azure extension. Like in the old portal, they let you specify them like at one time, and now in the new portal, it's like create your VM. And then when it's done, come back to it and tell me the extensions you want. Like, why would you do that? But anyway, but we'll do this pretty quick. So I'm going to say, this is easy. We'll call this Matt. And we hope that I remember to turn this off later because it's on a credit card. I don't really care about this, but I'm going to put it into this user group. We'll keep that over there. That's fine. Now here's the cool thing. So I can click and I can say chef. So what this will do is this lets me directly in Azure say add chef config, tell it to point to my chef server. Now I don't have to do it this way if I'm using Azure. I can create an Azure VM and I can install and configure chef on it using other command line tools like any other machine. But it's pretty cool that chef added this directly. A point I want to make, and this is the only thing I'm going to say about this because I usually don't say things about our competition. But so you'll see Puppet there. Puppet's not in the new portal. So take that for what you will. There is no Puppet extension in the
Chef's
portal.
not in Linux,
What's that?
but Chef's not in Linux.
It is for Ubuntu,
Oh, okay.
not for
So,
yeah, not for Cent. I'm not sure why. I had the same thing. It is for Ubuntu. Yeah, because it drove me crazy. I'm like, especially at ChefConf last year. Mark Rosanovic is up there showing off how they're doing all this, and I'm like, where's the clicky? But it's Ubuntu. So this is important. So when I'm creating it, and I'm going to kind of hand wave past what they do. But when I'm creating a new, when I'm configuring a machine, it needs what's called a client RB, which is basically its config. It says, hey, here's where your chef server is, mostly. And then it also needs a validation key, which is an authorization key that says you are allowed to register yourself to that chef server. And then the run list is an optional thing, but it's saying this is what recipes should run on it. So I'm going to, because I already know, I want it to have the role of base because that configures something for me. But so I can choose the client file and the key. I could either upload them directly from my local machine, which is fine. But what's neat is I can store them in Azure storage. And why that's really powerful is I can make it so that way I don't have to share that key with everybody, right? So you may not have access to that actual part of Azure storage to download it or to view it, but I can still point to it. So I can sit here and I can say, okay, get your client. And also if I just store it in storage, then you don't have to worry about, hey, what should it be configured? Do I have a copy of it? It's all in there. So I can go in here. Grab that guy. And then off it goes. And then we watch paint dry because that's what happens when we do demos about demonstrating infrastructure. But if we take a look back here, this is my instance of Chef, where I already had this ALM, this demo one. So this was a machine I built a little earlier today. And this already has been configured to, so we can see a couple, this is just some of the things I can see about it. So there's, first of all, just all the general things. It checked in 2 minutes ago, that's cool. I can see its run list, so it has a role of base, which means it runs the Chef client recipe, which in this case, what that does is it makes sure that Chef is running as a service. So that, because otherwise it would run the one time and then not again until I did anything else. And then, but because it did that, it meant that I could drop the web server role in there and I knew it would pick it up. This is the thing, so Chef will tell you all of these attributes about your system and then you can use them in your recipe. So like a good example might be that I can know the amount of physical RAM in a machine, and maybe I want to set the amount of memory on an app pool based upon that. So it's not always the same. So I can do it programmatically. I do that in a cookbook I have that configures my web server that's running Nginx, and I'm like, okay, if I've got more than 3 gig of RAM, I want the Nginx cache to be on the RAM drive, but otherwise I want it on this file place. So I'm doing these things, it's all specific. And then you'll also see that under My Awesome App, we have our attributes that we had set, you know, that for example, the site name and all this, and those all came from the default. Now, if I go to my environments, so I have in a prod environment, I've actually overridden the name of the app pool user. So what that means is that if a node is in that app pool, the app pool user will be created that way. So it'll be different as it goes. And where that's the other thing that is important, and I didn't show this here, is this idea of cookbook constraints, because this is what gives us predictability as well, is that version, I can constrain and say, okay, because my cookbooks are all versioned. When I upload a new copy of them, they have a new version. And I may not want that new version of my infrastructure code applied to everything immediately. So I can be very specific and say production is version 1.0 of My Awesome App. So if I upload 1.1, I have to explicitly, probably in some type of automated way, but still explicitly say, yes, it's time for production to get the new version of my infrastructure code. So that's fundamentally how it works. Of course, it's never keep track of it. These are, I think everything is mostly written up on the board with some of my links. The code is up there on my GitHub if you wanted to take a look at it and see how it goes. And I have a prize to the first person who asks a question. So we'll start questions.
I have a question.
Okay. What's the prize? Is that the question?
So how deterministic is the rolling out of the updates to machines and things?
Oh, like how? Okay, that's a really good question. I have a really nice Chef notebook. So the Chef client can be run as a scheduled task. It can run as a Windows service, can be a cron job, can be daemonized, or you can run it on demand. So that's when that was you're talking about, like, how does it know when to?
If I just check in a new cookbook version or say, hey, this should go to production, when do we expect it to be there?
The next time the Chef client, it's a pull system.
But is it on the microcontroller or is it?
It could be.
Watch and wait?
It could be. Depends on how you implement it. So there's a couple different ways to skin that cat.
Okay.
So you could have, one of the things that happens too is, and when I was showing you how I had the Chef client cookbook, so like that's actually using Chef to manage Chef. So one of its attributes is the interval in display. So you might, and because it's an attribute, I can set it differently in different environments. So I might say in dev, I want the Chef client running every 5 minutes because it's really volatile. But maybe in production, I only want it running once a day. You know, but you can also you can trigger a Chef client run manually, either the super manual way, which is like to SSH or WinRM to the box and run Chef-client, or we also have something called push jobs. And the main reason for push jobs give you the ability to send a command to a client. I don't think push jobs are supported on Windows clients right now. Could be wrong, but the main use of them is actually just to run Chef client. Like, because it's a whitelisted list of commands. It isn't like just a total remote shell.
Is that SSH also, or is it
No, it goes over a custom port. So that's kind of
the server or something?
Yeah, the server, it basically has, it creates a service that runs on the machine that's like an ops code push job service, and it listens on a high port. And so the Chef server knows how to go talk to that. So like where that is, so again, mostly where that's used for is if you've got a pipeline where you're like, after I push an application code change, I need to run Chef client like right away so that it pulls up that application. You might, have your Jenkins build or whatever, call a push job client, but you could also just as easily have it just execute Chef client locally. We're not talking, something I haven't talked about at all is we have a new product called Chef Delivery, which is a continuous delivery product that's in early access. It is super dependent on push jobs, like inside its world, right? That's how it, how it works. So they can call changes here and there.
So, what is Puppet to you? As a Chef employee?
Well, I can tell you as a person who used Puppet for a few years and then used Chef. So I also like to tell people that I work at Chef because I love Chef. It's not the other way around. Like I actually made a very lateral professional move to go work at Chef. Left a company I loved, making pretty much the same money, because I wanted to work for them. So at a really core level of like, hey, I just want to configure a resource, it's the same, right? It's just, it's curly braces versus do loops. But some of the biggest differences, the differentiators that I see, is one is definitely scale. So this is one of the reasons why, I can tell you why Chef existed, because Chef came out of the fact that Adam Jacob had problems with Puppet. So Adam Jacob, the guy who created Chef, he had a consulting company that was doing all this automation work for all these, West Coast web scale companies using Puppet and just kept running into problems. And one of them was certainly scale. So up until the most recent version of Puppet server, a Puppet server would fall over at a little over 1,000 nodes, which is why if you talk to most people using Puppet, they run Puppet in what they call masterless, which means they don't have a central server. They're just sort of pushing changes all over and then running Puppet, but you don't have this mother brain in the middle. They just rewrote, and I could be wrong. I think it's the server that they just wrote in Clojure. They just rewrote the whole thing. And now they're like, now 4 times as many. And we do that little Willy Wonka, like, that's cute. We can do 60,000, like with about 4 cores and 8 gig of RAM. And I have a customer that has 250,000 nodes checking into one Chef server. So it scales like crazy. And that has to do with what they'll talk about, like having to wait for this long compilation thing on their Puppet master. And what fundamentally happens with Chef is we make sure the server doesn't die death of 1,000 cuts. So you put a tiny little bit of extra work onto all the clients so that it's not all happening on the server level. The other part does have to do with the DSL, right? So in Puppet, you have this like graph theory thing about every single resource. So like when we looked at that Chef recipe I showed you, Chef recipes are evaluated top to bottom, left to right. They're human readable, right? And then in Puppet, it's every module you have to be like, and then this notifies that and subscribes to this and does all this. So it's much more complicated. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, but it's why I introduce complexity where you don't need it. Perhaps ironically, in the most recent version of Puppet, they introduced something called more, which is something ordered execution of resources. And if you look at the source code, which Puppet is also open source, it's actually called Chef mode. But to be fair, we stole Puppet apply and called it Chef apply. So it's all good. But what I do see as a big differentiator is two things that come into play. One is the DSL, is because in either case, you're going to have to learn some Ruby at some point when you want to do more than assemble a couple of building blocks. And for a lot of people, they may not have to. But if you're going to have to do that, you kind of snuck up and learned Ruby while you're writing Chef and didn't know it. So the glide path to Ruby is easier when you've been writing Chef code. And also, just from a career perspective, I'm like, if I have to learn something, I'd rather learn something that teaches me 2 things than 1 thing. And then also, like I alluded to, the reason that the testing ecosystem around Chef is second to nobody, Salt, Ansible, anybody, is because we can just piggyback on all the Ruby stuff. It's already there. Chef spec is just an extension of our spec. So it was easier to do. It's a lot harder to write testing tools for a brand new thing than to extend. And then finally, I just talk about community. And this isn't that our community is better, but in my perception, it's more what I liked. And I heard an example was given once that it's sort of like the difference of like the Python versus Ruby community. They're both good communities. It's not like which one has nicer people, but the philosophy of the communities are different. Python is the measure 3,000 times, cut once, that's the Python way. Ruby is like, let's just try a whole bunch of shit and we'll see what happens, and some of it will work and some of it won't. And if you like that, then you're gonna like the Ruby community better. And that's really a reason to pick Ruby over Python or the other way around, because they both do the same thing, right? They're similar languages. Same thing with Chef and Puppet. And I find Puppet is still perceived and sold by them as this is a tool for sysadmins. And they're trying, which ironically they still see DevOps as a way of automating operations things, whereas the layered approach, DevOps and scale are in the DNA of Chef. So, and that's a big part of my talk at that conference, which is how can we work in that way where you don't, because in my mind, if all you do is have an automation team, you've just moved silos around, right? I haven't made everybody's life better. So that was almost all opinion. Some of it's data, most of it's opinion.
When you ran not verified, did you already have your VMs?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I said that super duper fast. Yeah, so what would have happened, yeah, I did that just to save time. So I'd already run the step of kitchen create and kitchen converge. So kitchen create would create the VM, converge applies the cookbook. I just didn't want you guys to have to sit and wait for like 5 or 6 minutes to watch a virtual box come up.
That's what I was curious, because I didn't even, you spun it up and it tested against that machine.
Yeah, it was, there's a VBox that's running on my machine that was, it ran against that one. And that's a super simple kitchen file. What's cool is I can write matrix tests, so I could, and especially like if I'm writing a cookbook that needs to apply to multiple platforms, I can define them, so I can say run it against 2008 R2, 2012 R2, or these various versions of Linux or whatever. Kind of rough doing that with Windows because those VMs are really resource hungry. So those, if I'm going to do those, I tend to do them in a cloud provider than try to I'll kill my machine trying to spin up 5 Windows VMs all at the same time. And there's also a Docker driver for kitchen. So if you're doing Linux testing, that's like super sweet. And it's really fast. So we are, and this idea of Test Kitchen is one of the main reasons that we at Chef are super jazzed about Nano, because Nano is going to be a really, really nice way to help do this kind of stuff. And then speaking of that, I just realized, because I didn't throw this in there, so I'm sorry, throwing all this stuff out here. I totally didn't talk about desired state configuration at all, which is Microsoft's thing. So how many people have heard of DSC or PowerShell DSC? Maybe a little bit, okay. So this is it's part of Windows Management Framework. It started with Windows Management Framework 4. It's basically an API is a way to think about it. It lets, because Windows is really hard to configure in an automated way. It doesn't like to be configured, and Windows products don't like to be configured. So with DSC, what they did is they said, okay, we're going to basically present something that if you look at you can write code in PowerShell that will leverage DSC, and it looks a lot like Puppet or Chef code. But they're also just resources that are made applicable. So it's like, hey, so just like I kind of showed, like I had this IIS site resource, that's a resource that someone wrote in a cookbook. Microsoft is saying, we're going to write a DSC module that gives you this thing. Chef consumes them natively. So you can write Chef code to just use PowerShell DSC modules that are exposed. This is important for 2 reasons when we talk strategically about Microsoft. One is Microsoft has something called the Common Engineering Certification. Common Engineering Certification. So any Microsoft product targeted at what they call, IT pros, so like SQL Server, Exchange, Link, or Skype, or whatever the hell it is, blah, 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 has a certain set of things it has to ship, have in order to ship. So the last wave of products, it was everything you could do in the GUI, you had to be able to do in a PowerShell command. The next wave of projects, they have to all ship with DSC resources. So that's the way. And then the thing is, a lot of people say, well, why should I use Chef? Shouldn't I just use DSC? And so Jeffrey Snover, who is the guy who invented PowerShell, runs Windows Server division, blah, blah, blah. He said, his exact word was, quote unquote, was, DSC is like a printer driver. Chef is Microsoft Word. So DSC is giving you the, again, and a lot of people have built stuff around DSC. So the question is, you could do DSC all by itself, and then you would have to write your own Chef around it. You know, so we're tightly partnered with those guys. We have there's changes that are happening on the Microsoft side to make Chef work better and blah blah blah. So we're all good buddies.
One more question, anybody asks?
So the community comes in to write the recipes?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that's really powerful. So there's the community aspect comes in a couple places. So one is just in general, we do a big community summit every year. So it's an event that is all open spaces, no salespeople allowed. It is put on by Chef Software Inc., but it is run by the community. So it's a chance, you know, that's just a super powerful thing. And as much as I've been using Chef, this last year was the first time I went to one, and it was one of the best experiences I had, because it's just like, you know, you just go and have all these brain melting conversations and you're like, oh my, what are you doing over there? But the community really supports each other too. So through both like we have a mailing list that is very, very active, and it's kind of hard for people who are used to getting like enterprise server support, which of course you always can. I mean, if you buy Chef from us, I mean, we can do tickets and stuff, but a lot of times we're like, ask a question on the mailing list, because you know what? Adam Jacob, the guy who wrote Chef, is on that mailing list. Like, we're all on it, and the community helps you, and also in like IRC. But then there's the community cookbooks. So we have a site called the Supermarket, which is kind of it's not even really curated, but you could kind of think about it like GitHub. It's like, you know, open source rules apply. I have customers ask me almost once a week who are like, how do you make sure someone doesn't, you know, how do you make sure the quality of the cookbooks people upload? And I'm like, how does GitHub make sure the quality of the code that people put up there? You know, again, if somebody like put up a cookbook that would like RF off of, you know, the root or something like that, and we found out about it, we would remove it. But they contribute them back, and then it's all open source, you know, so you can either say, hey, someone's already, and most of the time, so if it's basically a way of extending stuff that's not in core Chef, you know, and most of the time, if there's something that you wanted to do, that you want to do, someone's probably already done it and put it up in the Supermarket or got close. So then you can either, again, open source rules apply, right? You can either be like, well, I'm just going to fork it and make it my own and bring it behind my firewall and it's my thing because I have to make it really special for me. Or I'm finding a gap, and this is, of course, what we encourage is there's a gap, right? There's a feature this thing doesn't have because the guy who wrote it never knew that was a thing someone might want. So I'll fix it, and I'll submit a pull request. So now that's what I did with the Windows Firewall cookbook. You know, some guy wrote it a couple of years ago. It was one of those one commit projects. It did the thing he wanted it to do. Then I was doing it. I was like, oh, well, here's all the more things I want to have it do, and made it better. So. But the thing is, people who use Chef want everybody else to be really successful with Chef. It's really funny. So you get a lot of free help.
Can Chef be used to configure Azure services,
Mhm.
just Azure VM?
Yes, yeah. There's a few cookbooks, and we're working with the Azure team on that. I would have said we were working with MS OpenTech, except they're not a group anymore. Now they're all back to regular Microsoft again. So there's a couple of cookbooks out there that will manage Azure storage, and I think VNets. I haven't looked at the cookbook in a while, so I know their activity on it. But the idea is, yeah, exactly the same way. So you
It's
can,
going to be real tedious setting up, doing all the Azure configuration.
of course.
For virtual networks and storage accounts. And
Yeah, and I didn't talk about something called Chef provisioning, which is what lets you, instead of like that recipe actually would be like, we were talking about one single node. Chef provisioning lets you describe a recipe for a group of machines that might go together, but then it could also consume like the Azure resources that would all be part of it. So you're like, yeah, I want to spin up a group of machines, and I have all these, and this group of machines includes 10 web servers that have this role, one database server that has this role, these 6 storage accounts, these VLAN, you know, and then it all interacts together. So, and there is an Azure driver for Chef provisioning. So.
could they do things like setting up a number of instances and
That's what Chef
geo-replication?
Specifically, I don't know.
All those things.
I would say it probably doesn't do all those things. That cookbook probably doesn't do all those things now. But knowing the engineering effort, like I seriously was just talking to some people at Microsoft a week ago, and they're like, where are our priorities? You know, like SQL Server cookbook. That's it. Because, and this is more of a factor of SQL Server not liking to be configured once it's up. SQL Server Cookbook's really good for creating a SQL Server, but then going back and managing its configuration once it's there, SQL Server is like, no, that's why we have VBAs. So, but we announced there was a press release towards the beginning of the year, there's this, engineering collaboration between Chef and the Azure product group specifically around enabling more Azure resources with Chef. So I just don't know what's specifically in it. So, but my point was, it may not necessarily have all that now, but.
And you showed doing Chef development in Visual Studio.
Oh, any text editor.
Can I do it in Visual Studio?
Sure.
Does it have IntelliSense support?
If it supports Ruby, you're fine. Yeah, this is one of those things, just because, so that's something that we've sort of been, it's interesting, the Visual Studio team is really interesting with Chef, because like they shipped, I don't remember what they called their like mid-band release stuff, whatever the thing was they shipped last summer, and it had certain Chef functionality in it that nobody at Chef knew happened. So like when you do a deployment, you can deploy using PowerShell DSC or Chef. And we knew about it because of the release notes. Like, okay. But that's the thing, we get asked about like having, like a plugin for Visual Studio for Chef. And again, the reason being, if what you're mostly doing is writing Chef code, Visual Studio is huge overhead. But if you're spending most of your day in Visual Studio and you're like, every now and again, I just got to write a little Chef code, you don't want to have to bob out to Sublime or Atom or something else. So
I like to keep all of my development working simple.
absolutely. So my answer would be not today. Lots of demand for it. Only so many people. But that's something we've talked to Microsoft too about, and saying, hey, you guys do that. And just I think when I look at the pulse I get from the way that partnership goes, there's going to be more and more driving force within Microsoft in general around Chef, and that's what will help.
How strong is the community for Chef specifically?
With Windows?
Yeah, with Windows and Visual Studio. Because that's the type of thing that if this was Eclipse, I think it would be a community plugin already.
Well, the problem is still that we're getting, it's that in general, okay, so if we kind of do, and I don't know if this will work as a Venn diagram, but if we say there's like kind of or we'll do it kind of this way, right? Let's do Dev, Ops, Linux, Windows, right? So this was first ones to start doing Chef work. Then you kind of got maybe, I don't know how this is going to work the way I wanted it to. I was going to say, then you kind of got this around, these guys kind of happen around the same time, and this is 4. So it all really, kind of all this stuff really started in ops. And so the people who've been doing Chef Windows stuff over the last few years have been primarily, tech ops. So having devs be involved in Chef on a non-Windows platform has been around, but not around since day one. So but that's why I'm saying, like, in the last year, so much desire on the Microsoft side, in that. So I'd say, well, how big is that community? I'd say it's just depending upon organizational shift. Because when I'm going into places that are starting to do this work, they're wanting to do it, quote, right from the beginning. They're saying, okay, we're going to do this thing, and we're going to have the dev and the ops on board at the same time. We're starting this way. We're not going to bring it in as an ops tool and do that. So, but I don't know. It's hard for me to say when I just think about my personal experiences. Like, I have a lot of customers who are doing infrastructure stuff now, but come from a dev background in the Windows side, so.
Another question. So I don't know what's the equivalent in Windows Azure, but Amazon has this CloudFormation template, right?
Yeah, the CFT, yeah.
I know that people use CloudFormation with Chef. I have not used personally yet. But is there, both can do both things. Is there a place to draw the line?
Yeah, I kind of look at it, so in a way it's a little bit about the just general virtual machine templates versus configuration management. And it's one of the things where I say it's more art than science, right? It's like kind of figuring out what goes in a template. Because the thing that's nice about an image, what goes in an image, the thing that's nice about images, they're fast as hell, right? I want one, is there. Configuration management, it might take 30 minutes for that machine to get configured if I'm doing lots and lots of things the first time. So kind of the magic sauce is, first of all, is build your images using your configuration management. So the first CM run should actually probably do nothing except maybe do some tweaks of things that might have changed. So like people use stuff like Packer to like define, like create like an AMI factory or something like that in Amazon, so they know that their images got built with Chef. So then when Chef runs on them the first time they come up, as long as that AMI is not that out of date, and it shouldn't be, maybe you're refreshing them weekly or whatever, it's just going to do a run, and then it kind of takes it from there. So one of the places where that can go on is that use something like CFT for provisioning, and then use Chef for the ongoing management of the system once it's there. And then you can get into lots of different philosophical discussions about so-called immutable infrastructure. And I like to say that your infrastructure is immutable only if nobody uses it. If somebody touches something, it changes. So there's a lot of, it's an interesting world to live in right now, you know, and to look at what's cool and might work, and you know what actually needs to be done to get stuff done. So. But I would look at it in that manner, right? It's usually just a race to get the Chef client on there, and then let Chef
I like
manage
the
it.
Packer alternative. I hadn't thought about it.
And then especially if you're looking at Amazon and Azure, you know what I mean? And like doing this, it lets you kind of, with that one configuration, kind of bake out an AMI, but maybe also a VMDK for your local machine. You know what I mean? Like you can. That's one of the, I mean, that's kind of the point of Packer, you know, is that it, you know, lets you kind of output the end state to multiple things.
So how would you know that Chef is done and now it can actually start deploying your app, and then you can put it back and put it in the pool, right? In pool service. So how do you know that Chef is done? Or
That the machine is converged in a converged state.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, the best way to do that in a way is to let Chef be part of your release, because the Chef client will only run one at a time. So if the Chef client tries to run when it's in the middle of a Chef run, it won't run. It won't have multiple instances of Chef-client. So I usually tell people, I'm like, if you have something with Capistrano or Octopus or whatever, I'm not going to come in and tell you rip it out and use Chef instead. But if you don't have automated app release, or you know what I mean, like then bundle it into that. Now I will tell you again, I have tried every single way Microsoft has told me to configure my servers, and tried almost about every way to do application release that there is in my career. And the problem that I have with Octopus in a way is that it's still not declarative, right? It's still based on the kind of old MS deploy, transform ideas of stuff. Whereas configuration management, I mean, an application release is just a configuration endpoint or a configuration point, right? Which is it should have this thing. So
deploy apps with Chef.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And that's in fact, actually that cookbook that came up first, at first I was like, oh, this isn't what I want. That's something I'm working on with a friend of mine, which is creating a resource cookbook for .NET web app that just makes it so you have that nice little skeleton where like, I don't need to know how to do this. I can just say, I want a .NET web app with these parameters, like the NuGet source or the version that it should pick, whatever that might be, and then be able to do that stuff. Like today, it would require a little more Chef surgery. Not a lot, but it'd be a little more customized. The reason is there's a couple really good application cookbooks for deploying applications, but they're written by a guy who, a lot of times you'll see stuff within the Chef community, like Test Kitchen at first didn't support Windows properly, and it wasn't because Fletcher hated Windows. It's just like, I just don't know it, but now I see it's important, so I'm going to work on it. But then you look at like Noah Kantorowicz, who's like the guy who wrote the application cookbooks, and he's like, I actually just hate Windows, and I'm not going to invest any time in that. And I'm like, okay, well then someone else will do it, So that's something that I think and you're going to see more and more of that. Especially one of the things we're seeing more of is a lot of this work has been done, but it's been done behind the firewall, and companies are getting better. Enterprises are getting much more into this idea of being able to contribute stuff back. And so we're seeing kind of this mini explosion, even in the last 3 months, I'd say. I'm just seeing all of a sudden, all of this stuff, like it's almost like once a week, I'm getting some note about so-and-so just released this thing that I know they've had internally for years. And they figured out how to do the legal stuff. They figured out how to scrub it out so that it was, because the problem with doing that is not just even the legal. The problem is also, how do I make it so it actually works for other people and isn't artisanally crafted for Target, right? How do I make it actually cross-platform and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, like Target's F5 cookbook has been legendary for years. Like anybody who's touched Target knows that it exists, but we're like, you know, and then they released it, and CenturyLink just released their provisioner for chef provisioning for vSphere, and that's huge. Like we didn't have one, you know, and people were like, when are you gonna have that? And we're like, well, we were working with VMware to build one or whatever, and you know, and because CenturyLink's a big part of the community, we're like, we know they have that, and we kind of knew they were building it to be open source. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, we open sourced, and we went, awesome. And like anybody who'd been doing chef provisioning in a VMware environment went, this is great. I now have this thing. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, because I know customers are doing it. They just haven't been able to share it.
I think is that a lot of these is not their intellectual property related to the company, right? So
yeah.
Like Nike has, I don't know, chef recipes. I mean, those are not for selling shoes. Those
Yeah.
are for
They're plumbing, right?
Yeah. Just keep it away.
There's one that's really. Are we still recording?
Should I stop?
Can you pause before I say this?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Actually,
This is one of the ones I'm just never sure. Like everybody knows this company as a customer. They give talks at ChefCon. But okay, so Disney.